I'm not taking care of that old witch after this funeral, my daughter-in-law whispered loudly beside my son's casket, certain I was too broken to hear her. But grief sharpens some things instead of dulling them, and every word sliced through the silence of St. Matthew's Church like cold glass. I stood there beside Ethan's coffin with my black gloves folded tightly in my hands, staring down at the polished mahogany wood while people moved quietly around me offering casseroles, sympathy cards, and soft touches to my shoulder that barely registered anymore. My son was gone, 45 years old, gone after a sudden heart attack nobody saw coming. The organ music drifted through the church in slow, mournful waves, and the white lilies near the altar smelled so strong they made my stomach ache. Vanessa stood 3 feet away in an expensive black dress with dry eyes and perfectly styled blonde hair, one hand resting dramatically against her chest, while she accepted condolences like she was hosting a dinner party instead of burying her husband. I swear, she muttered to one of her friends near the front pews, I am not spending my life taking care of some bitter old woman. The friend glanced nervously toward me, but Vanessa only gave a small laugh. Ethan always felt guilty about her. I don't. I kept my eyes on the casket because I knew if I looked at her too soon, she would see exactly how much I had heard. My hands trembled slightly, so I smoothed invisible wrinkles from Ethan's funeral program again and again until the paper bent at the corners. The church felt too warm. Or maybe it was the pressure building behind my ribs. Ethan used to call me every Sunday morning before Vanessa slowly found ways to shorten the conversations. Then the calls became texts. Then holidays became complicated schedules and awkward excuses. Still, I never imagined standing at my son's funeral listening to his wife discuss me like unwanted furniture she needed removed from the house. My granddaughter Mia sat alone near the back pew, her pale face lowered toward her lap, while Vanessa entertained distant relatives near the altar. The poor girl looked exhausted, 16 years old and already learning how quickly people can become strangers after a death. When the pastor began speaking, I sat quietly in the second row where Ethan once reserved a seat for me every Sunday after his father died. I remembered his small hand reaching for mine when he was 7 years old, remembered how he used to lean against my shoulder during long sermons and whisper jokes that made me fight back laughter inside church. Now all I had left was a folded funeral bulletin and the sound of his wife discussing where to put me once the casseroles stopped arriving. After the service ended, people slowly filtered toward the fellowship hall downstairs for coffee and sandwiches, but I stayed behind near the empty pews. I couldn't bear another performance of sympathy. That was when I noticed a tall, gray-haired man standing near the side entrance watching Vanessa with an expression I couldn't quite read. He wore a dark wool coat despite the mild October weather, and when our eyes met, something in his face shifted. Recognition, hesitation. Then he walked toward me slowly, holding a leather folder against his chest. Mrs. Whitmore, he said quietly, my name is Caleb Turner. Your son asked me to contact you if anything ever happened to him. Caleb Turner waited until the last guest disappeared into the fellowship hall before speaking again. The church had grown quiet except for the faint clatter of coffee cups downstairs and the distant hum of traffic outside on Maple Avenue. I could still smell candle wax and lilies hanging heavily in the air. Your son came to see me 3 weeks ago, Caleb said softly, keeping his voice low enough that nobody nearby could overhear. He looked to be around 70 himself, tall and thin with silver hair combed neatly back and tired eyes that seemed older than the rest of him. He was worried. I stared at him without answering. Grief had left me too exhausted for politeness, too exhausted for surprise. Caleb slowly held out a cream-colored business card with his office address embossed in dark blue letters. Turner and Associates, Hartford, Connecticut. Ethan asked me not to contact you unless something happened unexpectedly, he continued. I believe you deserve to know he was trying to put certain protections in place. Protections. The words settled strangely in my chest. Before I could ask anything else, Vanessa's sharp heels echoed across the church floor behind us. There you are, she said brightly, though the smile on her face disappeared the moment she noticed Caleb standing beside me. Everyone is downstairs waiting. Her eyes flicked toward the folder tucked under Caleb's arm. Something cold moved across her expression so quickly most people would have missed it. But I did not. Mrs. Whitmore, Caleb said politely with a small nod toward her. Vanessa forced a smile. And you are? An old colleague of Ethan's. It was not exactly a lie, but it clearly irritated her. Vanessa slipped one manicured hand around my elbow with just enough pressure to make the gesture feel less caring and more controlling. Helen has had a very emotional day, she said. I think it is best if she gets home. Home. The word no longer sounded stable when she said it. I quietly pulled my arm away and told her I would be down in a minute. For a brief second, her jaw tightened. Then the polished expression returned. Do not take too long, she said softly before walking away across the sanctuary. Caleb watched her disappear through the double doors before leaning slightly closer to me. Do not sign anything she gives you, he said. My stomach tightened immediately. Why would she ask me to sign something? Caleb hesitated just long enough to frighten me. Because your son believed certain financial decisions were already being made without his knowledge. I looked toward the fellowship hall doors where Vanessa's laughter floated faintly into the empty church. It sounded practiced, smooth, almost impatient. Suddenly, I remembered small things I had ignored for months. Ethan canceling lunch plans at the last minute. Vanessa insisting on handling all the household accounts after his health scare in the spring. The way Ethan had once paused in the middle of a sentence during dinner and stared silently into his coffee as though he wanted to say something but could not find the courage. Caleb gently handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in Ethan's handwriting. Seeing those familiar, uneven letters nearly broke something inside me. Read it when you are alone, Caleb said quietly. And Mrs. Whitmore, your son loved you very much. I nodded because I could not trust my voice anymore. Caleb gave me one last sympathetic look before walking slowly toward the side exit and disappearing into the gray October afternoon. I remained standing beside the empty pews for several moments, holding the envelope carefully between both hands like something fragile enough to fall apart. Then I noticed Mia standing halfway down the aisle near the back of the church. She had probably heard more than either of us realized. Her eyes shifted nervously toward the envelope before she whispered, "Grandma, Mama's been throwing Dad's things away since last week." I drove home alone that afternoon beneath a sky the color of wet cement, gripping Ethan's envelope so tightly at every red light that the paper softened at the edges beneath my gloves. The trees lining our neighborhood had already begun shedding their orange and yellow leaves across the sidewalks, and for the first time in nearly 20 years, the Whitmore house did not feel like somewhere I belonged. Vanessa's silver Mercedes was already parked in the driveway when I arrived. Beside it sat a large green dumpster I had never seen before. My chest tightened immediately. I stepped out of my Buick slowly, my knees aching from the cold October wind, and noticed several cardboard boxes stacked near the garage door. One of them had Ethan's college handwriting across the side in black marker. Boston apartment. Winter clothes. I stood there staring at it for several seconds before the front door opened. Vanessa appeared holding her phone against her ear. The moment she saw me looking at the boxes, her expression shifted almost imperceptibly before she forced a tired smile. "Oh good. You are home," she said quickly after ending her call. I figured it was time to clean some things out before they started collecting dust. Dust. My son had been dead less than 48 hours. I looked past her shoulder into the house and immediately noticed the silence. Not grief. Not mourning. A different kind of silence. Efficient. Organized. Like a hotel lobby after closing hours. Ethan's framed photographs were already missing from the entry table. The navy blanket he always kept draped over the couch had disappeared too. "Where is Mia?" I asked quietly. Vanessa shrugged while checking something on her phone. "Upstairs. She has been emotional." Then she glanced toward the envelope still tucked beneath my arm. "What is that?" The question came too quickly, too sharply. "Just paperwork from the church," I answered. It was the first lie I had told in years. Vanessa studied me for another second before stepping aside so I could enter. The smell of lemon cleaning spray drifted through the kitchen. I noticed fresh flowers already replacing the funeral arrangements on the counter. White orchids this time. Elegant. Expensive. Detached. My eyes moved instinctively toward Ethan's office down the hallway, but the door was closed. That door was never closed when Ethan was alive. "I changed the lock," Vanessa said casually, noticing where I was looking. "There are important financial documents in there." Something about the way she emphasized financial documents made my stomach twist. I quietly carried my purse upstairs to the guest room I had lived in ever since my husband passed away 3 years earlier. But when I opened the door, I stopped cold. Half my closet was empty. Several drawers had been cleared out. My winter coats were folded neatly into plastic storage bins stacked against the wall. I touched one of the bins slowly, unable to process what I was seeing. Vanessa appeared again, behind me holding a clipboard. A clipboard. I thought it might help if we started organizing things early, she said brightly. Eventually, we may need to discuss more comfortable living arrangements for you. Comfortable living arrangements. The words landed with such rehearsed politeness, they frightened me more than cruelty would have. I turned toward her slowly. Ethan promised I would always have a place here. For a brief second, annoyance flashed across her face before disappearing beneath sympathy again. Well, she said softly, circumstances change. After she walked away, I sat carefully on the edge of the bed staring at Ethan's envelope in my lap while the late afternoon light faded across the carpet. Downstairs, I could hear cabinet doors opening and closing. Vanessa humming quietly to herself. Then, somewhere near the garage, the heavy sound of something wooden being thrown into the dumpster. The house became strangely active after sunset. Drawers opening downstairs. Footsteps crossing the kitchen tile. The low murmur of Vanessa speaking on the phone behind closed doors. I remained seated on the edge of the guest bed with Ethan's envelope resting unopened in my lap, while darkness slowly gathered outside the bedroom windows. I was afraid to open it. Afraid the final words from my son might confirm something I had spent years trying not to see. Around 8 o'clock, Mia knocked softly on my door carrying a mug of chamomile tea in both hands. Her long brown hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and the oversized university sweatshirt she wore nearly swallowed her small frame. She looked exhausted in the way only grief and tension can exhaust a teenager. "Mom ordered takeout," she said quietly as she handed me the mug. "She already ate." I nodded and thanked her. Mia lingered awkwardly near the doorway, glancing toward the envelope. "Grandma," she whispered after a moment. "Dad and Mom were fighting a lot before he died." The sentence settled heavily between us. I looked up slowly. "About what?" Mia hesitated, rubbing nervously at the sleeve of her sweatshirt. "Money mostly. And the house." My fingers tightened slightly around the warm mug. "I thought your father handled all the finances." Mia gave a sad little shake of her head. "Not anymore." Downstairs, a cabinet slammed hard enough to make both of us flinch. Mia lowered her voice even further. "Dad started sleeping in his office sometimes." I stared at her silently while old memories began rearranging themselves inside my mind like pieces of a puzzle finally sliding into place. Ethan canceling family dinners because he was tired. Vanessa answering questions for him before he could speak. The forced smiles at Christmas. The strange tension during Easter brunch when Ethan accidentally called me from the driveway instead of his office and immediately hung up. At the time, I convinced myself all marriages go through difficult seasons, that people become distant under stress. But sitting there with my granddaughter beside me and my son buried less than 24 hours earlier, denial no longer felt possible. Mia sat carefully beside me on the bed. "A week ago I heard Dad yelling," she admitted softly. "Not yelling exactly. More like begging." My chest tightened painfully. Ethan hated confrontation. Even as a little boy, he would rather apologize for things he did not do than argue with someone he loved. "Did he say why?" I asked. Mia nodded once. "He kept asking her where the money went." Silence filled the room after that. The heater clicked softly through the vents while tree branches scratched faintly against the windows outside. Finally, I looked down at the envelope again. My name written in Ethan's familiar, uneven handwriting suddenly felt unbearable. Mia reached over carefully and touched my arm. "You should read it," she whispered. After she left the room, I locked the bedroom door for the first time since moving into the house years earlier. Then I sat beneath the soft yellow light of the bedside lamp and slowly opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single folded letter and a small brass key taped carefully to the back. My breathing caught immediately. Ethan's handwriting covered the page in dark blue ink. The first sentence alone nearly stopped my heart. "Mom, if you are reading this, it means I ran out of time before I could protect you myself." My hands shook so badly I had to place Ethan's letter flat against the quilt before I could continue reading. Outside the bedroom window, rain had started tapping softly against the glass, and somewhere downstairs I could hear Vanessa laughing quietly during another phone call. The sound drifted upward through the vents like something sour. I looked back down at the page. Mom, I know Vanessa has been making you feel unwanted for a long time. I should have stopped it sooner. I pressed my lips together, hard enough to keep them from trembling. Ethan's handwriting slanted unevenly across the paper, as though he had written the letter in a hurry or under stress. She thinks I do not notice the money disappearing, but I do. I found transfers from our joint accounts that I never approved. When I confronted her, she said I was paranoid because of my health. My eyes moved faster now, desperate and afraid at the same time. If something happens to me unexpectedly, do not trust anything she asks you to sign. Caleb has copies of everything. The brass key taped to the letter suddenly felt heavier in my palm. Ethan continued explaining that he had opened a private safety deposit box at Hartford Community Bank several months earlier after discovering unusual withdrawals connected to a property investment Vanessa had hidden from him. He apologized repeatedly throughout the letter. Apologized for distancing himself. Apologized for not defending me more firmly. Apologized for allowing guilt and exhaustion to silence him. Each sentence hurt in a different way because I could hear my son's voice inside every word. Halfway through the letter, I had to stop reading altogether. Tears blurred the ink while memories crowded painfully into my mind. Ethan at 10 years old bringing me burnt toast in bed every Mother's Day. Ethan staying up all night beside me at the hospital when my husband underwent heart surgery. Ethan promising after his father's funeral that I would never be alone as long as he was alive. Downstairs, another cabinet slammed sharply. I folded the letter quickly and wiped my face before anyone could knock on the door. A few minutes later, soft footsteps approached the hallway outside. Then silence. Then a gentle tap. Grandma. Mia's voice came quietly through the door. I unlocked it immediately. She slipped inside carrying an old framed photograph against her chest. It was a picture of Ethan at 16 standing beside me at a county fair, both of us sunburned and smiling awkwardly at the camera. Mom was throwing this away, Mia whispered. My stomach dropped. I took the frame from her carefully and noticed the cracked corner where it had hit something hard. She said, "Old photos make the house feel depressing." Mia sat beside me again while I tucked Ethan's letter back into the envelope. The rain outside had grown heavier now, streaking the windows in silver lines beneath the porch lights. Grandma, Mia said hesitantly, there is something else. I looked toward her. She twisted her fingers nervously together before speaking. Last Thursday, before Dad died, I heard Mom telling someone on the phone that she could finally sell the house once everything was over. The room suddenly felt colder. Did your father hear her? Mia nodded slowly. I think so. Later that night, they had the worst fight I have ever heard. My chest tightened again. I looked down at the brass key resting quietly in my hand, while Ethan's final words echoed through my mind. Protect yourself. Then Mia lowered her voice almost to a whisper. Grandma, I do not think Mom knows Dad left that letter for you. Sleep never came that night. I remained awake listening to the rain strike the roof in soft, uneven rhythms while the digital clock beside the bed crawled slowly toward morning. Around 2 o'clock, I heard footsteps moving downstairs again. Careful footsteps this time. Quiet. Deliberate. I sat motionless beneath the blankets holding Ethan's envelope against my chest while shadows from passing headlights drifted across the ceiling. A drawer opened somewhere below me. Then another. For several minutes, the house settled back into silence before I finally heard the faint sound of the garage door lowering. Vanessa was leaving in the middle of the night. When pale gray light finally appeared through the curtains a few hours later, I rose slowly from the bed with stiff joints and aching eyes. The rain had stopped, leaving the backyard soaked and covered with fallen leaves pressed flat against the grass. Downstairs, the kitchen was empty except for a half-finished cup of coffee sitting beside Vanessa's laptop. I noticed she had forgotten to close one of her email windows before leaving. I should have looked away. Instead, my eyes caught a subject line already open across the screen. Property transfer timeline. Beneath it sat several messages exchanged with a real estate agent named Scott Mercer. One sentence near the bottom made my stomach turn cold. Once Helen is relocated, the sale should move quickly. I stared at the words for several long seconds while the refrigerator hummed softly behind me. Relocated. Not grieving mother. Not family. Relocated. Like furniture. I stepped away from the laptop the moment I heard footsteps overhead. Mia appeared downstairs wearing wool socks and one of Ethan's old navy sweatshirts. Her eyes moved immediately toward Vanessa's computer before settling on my face. She left early, Mia said quietly. I nodded. Where does she keep going? Mia hesitated before opening the refrigerator and pouring herself orange juice. I think she has been meeting with that realtor almost every day. The brass key remained hidden safely inside my sweater pocket, while Ethan's letter rested folded beneath my mattress upstairs. I touched the key instinctively now, whenever fear started climbing into my chest. It reminded me my son had tried to leave me something besides apologies. Around 9 that morning, Vanessa finally returned carrying 2 paper coffee cups and speaking cheerfully into her phone. The moment she saw me sitting at the kitchen table beside Mia, her expression tightened almost invisibly before smoothing itself into politeness again. Helen, she said brightly, setting 1 coffee beside me. I thought later this afternoon we could discuss some practical arrangements moving forward. Practical arrangements. Everything she said sounded rehearsed now. I thanked her quietly without touching the coffee. Vanessa removed her coat slowly and glanced toward the hallway leading to Ethan's office. Also, she added carefully, I would appreciate it if everyone stayed out of Ethan's workspace for now. There are confidential matters I need to organize. Mia lowered her eyes toward the table. I noticed her jaw tighten. Dad never cared if Grandma went into his office, she said softly. Vanessa gave a thin smile. Things are different now. Silence spread across the kitchen after that. The grandfather clock near the dining room ticked steadily while cold morning light filled the windows. Then Vanessa pulled a stack of brochures from her tote bag and slid them carefully across the table toward me. Senior Living Communities of New England. My fingertips went numb before I even opened them. Smiling elderly couples stood printed across glossy pages beside words like comfort, transition, and peace of mind. Vanessa folded her hands calmly together. I just think it is time we start considering what is realistic for everyone. I looked down at the brochures while Ethan's final warning echoed quietly through my mind again. Do not sign anything she gives you. Then I noticed something handwritten across one brochure in blue ink. Reserved suite tour. Friday. Vanessa left the brochures spread neatly across the kitchen table as though she were presenting vacation packages instead of planning where to place her dead husband's mother. I sat there quietly staring at the smiling gray-haired couples printed across the glossy pages while the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the room. Somewhere outside, a lawn mower buzzed faintly from a neighboring yard. Ordinary suburban sounds. Ordinary morning light. Yet everything inside that house felt poisoned now. Vanessa moved efficiently around the kitchen, placing dishes into the dishwasher without looking directly at me again. The Maple Grove facility has excellent reviews, she said casually. They have movie nights, transportation services, even yoga classes for seniors. Seniors. Another word that sounded harmless until she used it. I folded the brochure carefully and placed it back onto the table. I am not moving anywhere, I said quietly. Vanessa gave a soft sigh like a patient woman dealing with a difficult child. Helen, this house is simply too large for everyone now. Everyone. She said it as though Ethan had already vanished from the walls, from the furniture, from the life he built here. Mia remained silent beside me, gripping her orange juice glass tightly enough for her knuckles to pale. Vanessa finally sat across from us, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the sleeve of her cream sweater. I know this is emotional, she continued gently, but we have to think realistically about finances moving forward. My stomach tightened immediately at the word finances. I remembered the email still open on her laptop. Once Helen is relocated, the sale should move quickly. Vanessa watched me carefully now, studying my face for signs of weakness or confusion. I realized suddenly that she expected grief to make me fragile. Easier to move. Easier to pressure. Easier to erase. Instead, I simply folded my hands together in my lap the way my mother taught me decades ago, whenever someone underestimated me. Ethan promised I would always live here, I repeated softly. For the first time since the funeral, Vanessa's composure slipped completely. Only for a second, but I saw it. Irritation, sharp and cold beneath the polished sympathy. Ethan also trusted me to make practical decisions, she replied. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked faintly in the hallway. Mia glanced nervously toward the sound before lowering her eyes again. The tension inside the kitchen had become so thick, even the air felt difficult to breathe. Finally, Vanessa stood and gathered the brochures back into a neat stack. There is no need to decide today, she said tightly. But I already scheduled a tour for Friday afternoon. Then she walked toward the hallway carrying her coffee cup, heels clicking softly across the hardwood floor. The moment she disappeared upstairs, Mia leaned closer to me. "Grandma," she whispered urgently. "Mom has been meeting someone in Dad's office at night." I turned slowly toward her. "Who?" Mia swallowed hard. "The realtor. Scott Mercer." My pulse quickened immediately. "How long?" "Before Dad even died." The kitchen suddenly felt colder again. Mia glanced toward the staircase before lowering her voice further. "Last week I heard them talking about renovation estimates and listing prices." Listing prices. While Ethan was still alive. I pressed my fingertips carefully against the edge of the table to steady myself. Then Mia reached into the pocket of her sweatshirt and slid something small across the table toward me. A silver key card. Ethan's office access card from the downtown Hartford building where he worked before switching mostly to remote consulting after his health problems began. "Dad told me to hide this," she whispered. "He said if anything happened, you should go to his office before Mom does." My heartbeat thudded painfully inside my chest now. Upstairs, I suddenly heard Vanessa's voice calling for Mia. Mia stood quickly from the table, but before leaving she looked directly at me with frightened eyes. "Grandma," she whispered. I think Dad knew he was running out of time. By Thursday morning, the atmosphere inside the house had changed completely. Vanessa no longer bothered pretending warmth around me. Her politeness had become clipped and mechanical, like a receptionist speaking to someone whose appointment was already ending. She spent most of her time inside Ethan's office with the door locked, while making hushed phone calls that stopped the moment footsteps approached. I stayed quiet. Quiet people notice things. That morning, after Vanessa left for another meeting, I finally decided to use the silver access card Mia had hidden for me. Hartford sat less than 40 minutes away, but the drive felt longer beneath the cold gray skies stretching over Interstate 84. Ethan's office building stood downtown beside a row of glass towers and coffee shops filled with people carrying umbrellas against the wind. I had only visited twice before during Ethan's consulting years. The lobby smelled faintly of polished marble and roasted coffee beans from the cafe near the elevators. My hands trembled slightly as I pressed the silver card against the security scanner. The light flashed green immediately. Access granted. Relief hit me so suddenly I nearly cried right there in the lobby. Ethan had wanted me there. The elevator carried me slowly to the 12th floor where most of the offices sat dark and quiet. Ethan's company had shifted many employees remote after the pandemic years earlier, leaving entire hallways strangely empty. His office door stood near the far corner overlooking downtown Hartford. For one terrible second, I feared Vanessa had already beaten me there. But when I inserted the brass key from Ethan's letter into the lower lock beneath the handle, it turned smoothly. Inside, the room still smelled faintly like Ethan's cedar cologne and dark roast coffee. I stood frozen in the doorway, absorbing the sight of his gray sweater folded across the back of his chair and the legal pads scattered across his desk in his familiar, messy handwriting. Grief hit differently there. Sharper. More intimate. I moved carefully through the office until I noticed a locked bottom drawer in the filing cabinet beside his desk. The brass key opened that too. Inside rested a thick manila folder labeled private. Beneath it sat several bank statements, printed emails, and a small flash drive sealed inside a plastic evidence bag. My pulse quickened immediately. I lowered myself slowly into Ethan's chair and began reading. The documents showed nearly $200,000 transferred over the past 11 months into accounts Ethan clearly did not recognize. Some payments were connected to luxury furniture companies, private travel expenses, and a property investment under an LLC registered solely in Vanessa's name. Then I found printed emails exchanged between Vanessa and Scott Mercer, the realtor. My stomach tightened harder with every page. Once the house sells, we can finally move forward without the burden. Another message discussed renovation estimates for the Whitmore property dated nearly 3 weeks before Ethan died. But the final document frightened me most. It was a signed amendment to Ethan's family trust prepared by Caleb Turner. The language was formal and precise, but the meaning became painfully clear after only a few lines. If Helen Whitmore was forced from the residence, denied housing support, or pressured into assisted living against her wishes, Vanessa Whitmore would immediately lose access to the majority of Ethan's estate. I stared at the page while my heartbeat pounded loudly inside the silent office. Ethan had known exactly what Vanessa planned, and he had tried to stop it before he died. Suddenly, my phone vibrated sharply in my purse, making me jump. Vanessa's name flashed across the screen. I answered carefully. "Helen," she said sweetly. "Where are you?" I looked down at the trust amendment still spread across Ethan's desk. Then I noticed something else lying beneath the folder. A printed airline reservation for Vanessa and Scott Mercer departing for Aruba 6 weeks from now. I returned to the house just before sunset with Ethan's documents locked safely inside my purse and a calmness I had not felt since the funeral. The October sky burned orange behind the trees as I pulled into the driveway beside Vanessa's Mercedes. Through the front windows, I could already see lights glowing inside the dining room. Vanessa had company. I stepped inside quietly and immediately smelled roasted chicken, garlic, and expensive red wine. Vanessa stood near the dining table wearing a cream-colored sweater dress with her hair carefully styled, laughing softly beside Scott Mercer as though the house were already theirs. The moment she saw me, her smile froze. Scott straightened awkwardly from his chair, suddenly aware he was standing inside the home of a grieving family only days after Ethan's funeral. "Helen," Vanessa said too brightly. "We were just discussing some renovation possibilities." Renovation possibilities. I removed my coat slowly and hung it beside the door before answering. "For a house that still belongs to my son?" Silence spread instantly across the dining room. Scott glanced uncomfortably toward Vanessa, but she recovered quickly. "I know this is emotional," she said in that same rehearsed tone I had grown to hate. "But we have to think about the future." I looked directly at Scott. "Did you know Ethan amended his trust before he died?" The color drained from Vanessa's face so suddenly it almost startled me. Scott blinked in confusion. "Trust," he repeated carefully. Vanessa stepped forward immediately. "Helen, I think you are overtired." "No," I said quietly. "I think I finally understand what my son was trying to protect." Upstairs, I heard Mia's bedroom door open softly. She was listening. Vanessa folded her arms tightly across her chest now, the polished sympathy finally cracking beneath irritation and fear. "You do not know what you are talking about," she snapped. For the first time since Ethan died, her real voice appeared completely. Cold, sharp, tired of pretending. I reached slowly into my purse and placed a copy of the trust amendment onto the dining table between the wine glasses and folded napkins. Scott picked it up first. His eyes moved rapidly across the page while the silence inside the room thickened. Then he looked at Vanessa with an expression I will never forget. Not affection, not partnership, alarm. "Vanessa," he said quietly, "you told me the estate transfer was straightforward." Vanessa's composure shattered completely after that. "Because it was supposed to be," she hissed before realizing too late what she had admitted aloud. Upstairs, I heard another floorboard creak. Mia had heard everything. Vanessa turned toward me with anger burning openly across her face now. "Do you know what it is like living with someone who needs constant attention?" she snapped. "Your son spent years drowning in guilt over you." The words hit hard, but not hard enough to break me anymore. I simply stood there looking at her calmly, while Ethan's voice echoed softly through my memory again. "Protect yourself." Scott slowly placed the trust document back onto the table and reached for his coat without another word. He looked embarrassed now, smaller somehow. "I should go," he muttered before leaving quickly through the front door into the cold evening air. Vanessa stared after him in disbelief. Then she looked back toward me with tears of frustration gathering in her eyes. "You ruined everything," she whispered. I shook my head slowly. "No, Vanessa," I answered quietly. "Your greed did that long before I ever walked into this room." The house fell silent after that except for the ticking grandfather clock near the staircase. A few seconds later, Mia came downstairs carrying Ethan's old framed photograph against her chest. She walked past her mother without stopping and stood beside me instead. And for the first time since my son died, I no longer felt like the unwanted woman being pushed out of her own family.